All right, welcome, guys. So, what's the point of reading books? So, personally, I didn't really get into reading until not last year, but the year before. So, around this time, 2 years ago, was the first book that I ever actually read. And I have a list of books, and the last book that I'm going to give you is actually the first book, the first real book that I ever read, cover to cover, read through, and actually applied. So, this was the first book that actually had application to my life, because for the most part all I was really doing was reading for school, right? So I was reading for an assignment in school so I could get through the book, answer the questions, and then get credit for the book, and then that was it, right? Aside from that, aside from English class, just trying to get credit, I never really picked up a book. I never read any books. I never had any interest in books until around this time last year. Probably around like April of that year, I was introduced to the idea of reading and the importance of reading. And that got me thinking. It got me starting to think. And then at one point, I think we had like a book fair or something like that. So I was able to get a few books for free. And so I asked if I could just go on the Barnes& Noble website instead of the school's website, because the school only had a certain amount of books that you could pick from. So I asked if I could just go on the Barnes & Noble website and pick out a book myself. And so what I did was I ended up picking up Atomic Habits, that book, and then a couple other books that are up on my shelf. But Atomic Habits was the main book that I started reading. And this is the one that really got me into self-improvement, was Atomic Habits, was starting to look at rewiring and changing my habits and looking at the importance of habits, right? So having the right habits can determine a lot about your life, but specifically can determine your success or your failure, right? So every time you perform a habit, you're getting 1% better, you're getting 1% worse, whether it's a good or a bad habit. So the habits that you have and the habits that you maintain will determine who you become. And so this idea of how important habits really were was what got me into self-improvement. So I'm just going to quickly talk about why most people don't read. And then I'm going to talk about what makes reading so important. And then, like I said, I'm going to give you guys a list of some of my favorite books, a couple that I'm reading right now, a couple that I just picked up that I haven't read yet. Actually, there's only one in here that I haven't read yet. But just a couple of really good books. They're all different topics, so different genres. So just like to give you some inspiration if you're just getting into reading, kind of give you some inspiration, maybe an idea for a book to start out with. So yeah. So the reason why most people don't read, and in my opinion, the main reason why people don't read is because we're getting the same satisfaction, right? We're fulfilling the same desire for reading through online, like social medias, through learning online, through getting information from shorts, from TikTok, right? So the main problem is actually stimulation, not stimulation. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying, but overstimulation is going to be the reason for most people not wanting to read and not needing to read, or sorry, not needing to, but not being able to read, right? And you don't feel a need to read because you're getting information elsewhere. So the main problem with overstimulation, the main problem with social media, is that it fries the dopamine receptors, meaning that A, it makes doing normal things like reading less pleasurable, and B, because of the style of TikTok, for example, where you're constantly scrolling, because of the style of content, you're always getting a new hit of dopamine every time you scroll. And so what happens is when you do something like reading a book that doesn't give you all of that dopamine all at once, it makes you stay focused and stay invested in the book for an extended period of time in order to get that same dopamine increase, right? And so because your dopamine receptors are fried out, because your attention span is now fried, it makes it very, very difficult for you to read a book. It makes it very difficult for you to pay attention to the book, and it makes it very difficult for you to actually absorb and learn the information in the book, because your attention isn't always all there, even if you can manage to read it. So the reason why most aren't reading is because they're simply frying their dopamine. They're getting their dopamine, right? They're getting their information. They're getting their knowledge and their wisdom from TikTok, right? And so because they're getting it there, which is more dopamine, faster and easier, they're always more drawn to and pulled towards the easier dopamine, meaning that they're pulled away from reading books. Reading books seems like an excruciating task, like a painful task. And this is because of the fact that our dopamine receptors are fried out, and because of the fact that we're not used to paying attention to something, the same piece of information, for more than about 30 seconds, right? So the other thing is actually, like I mentioned before, is a lack of focus. So when you can't focus, when people can't focus, when people can't concentrate, they're not going to be able to read a book. They're not going to be able to absorb the knowledge in the book, right? Because you have to be able to focus. You have to be able to stay present and stay focused on the words in the book for an extended period of time if you want to gain the information. Whereas, like I mentioned with TikTok, you only have to pay attention for a few seconds, and then as soon as you get bored, you scroll for a new dopamine hit, right? And so when we get used to this, our focus and our attention becomes scattered. Our attention is wanting to jump and bounce everywhere, right? Instead of staying focused and staying dialed in on what we're doing right now. And so what this will lead to and what this will do is it will make it very hard, very difficult for people to read books, simply because books aren't as stimulating. They aren't as fun. They aren't as enjoyable. They are fun and they are stimulating, but for someone with a fried dopamine receptors, it's not going to feel very fun. It's not going to feel very enjoyable. It might even feel painful to an extent. For those who are really addicted to social media, it might feel painful for a while, right? And so what happens is, because it's uncomfortable, because it's painful, people avoid it. Even if they know the value of it, right? Even if you understand the value of reading, you might avoid reading because it's more difficult to do than another habit or another task that you might want to do, like social media, right? And so the last thing I have for why people don't read is actually just a lack of knowledge, right? A lack of wisdom and information on how valuable books are, how valuable reading is. And so for me, I never really understood the value of reading, right? I only read because I had to for school. But the moment I understood the value of reading, I mean, look at my shelf now. The moment I understood the value of reading, I took it on as a habit and then eventually took it on as a personality trait. Like, it's a part of who I am now, right? Because I love reading so much and I love how much it helps me, how much it benefits me. All of these videos I'm making are the result of me reading the right books and studying the right information. And the best way to study information is through books, is through reading, right? And the amount of wisdom, the amount of knowledge that you can gain from a book is amazing for the price as well. You're only paying about $20 for a book, but you're gaining years and years and years of an expert's knowledge, an expert's wisdom, right? And so you're able to grow a lot faster than this expert was, for example, because you have access to his knowledge at the end of his process, at the end of his work, right? And so this gives us the opportunity to start from where other people finished, right? So let's say I can use Tim Ferriss for an example. His book, The 4-Hour Workweek, he has mastered business and entrepreneurship, at least in the new age version of entrepreneurship and business, right? He has mastered this skill. And so he's teaching it to others so that we can start from where he started. And then we will do our own research. We will create our own wisdom and our own knowledge from our own process as we evolve a little bit further. And then we will pass that down in books as well, so on and so forth. Right? And so reading books is extremely important for those who want to learn, who want to gain more knowledge and more wisdom and more success. It's going to be the fastest way for you to learn. It's going to be the most instant and most direct way for you to learn a piece of knowledge. And of course, reading without application won't do anything, but reading will start to program the brain, will start to rewire the brain circuitry so that it looks more like and reflects more of someone who is well versed in this piece of information. And so because your brain is starting to look this way, the more you act on it, the more you work on this thing, the more you will actually learn about it because you have this framework already created in your mind. So now I'm going to talk about what makes reading so important. And so what I just talked about is building knowledge. That's the first point, is building knowledge, right? So reading will help you to build your knowledge base. Reading will help you to build your knowledge base, even if, let's say, you aren't really able to do much in your life, right? Like, let's say you're still in school, for example. You can start reading books and start learning from those who are out in the world doing what you want to be doing. And so you'll get somewhat of a head start because you are gaining this knowledge and this wisdom, right? Before you can even go and do anything about it. If you can do something about it, even better, right? You gain this wisdom, you gain this knowledge, you gain this information that you can then use and apply on your own business or your own work or whatever it is, right? And the other thing with this is the difference between learning on TikTok, for example, or learning from a book, reading a book, is that you're more focused on it for a longer period of time, meaning you retain more of the information. Because when you're constantly jumping from topic to topic, you're not actually retaining any of the information that you're learning. Rather, you're just kind of confusing yourself and overcrowding the mind with random knowledge, random pieces of information that haven't been fully processed. Whereas with a book, you're giving yourself the time to fully absorb the information and to process it. So therefore, your brain can actually really process and gain this wisdom, gain this knowledge. So the other thing is programming the mind. So reading itself is a programming. It is a way of programming your brain. And so if you're reading the right books, you're going to be programming your brain for success. You're going to be programming yourself to make more money, to get get more muscle. If you're trying to get more muscle in the gym, right? Get fit. If you're reading the right books, let's say it's books on diet, right? You'll know exactly what foods to eat and when to eat, right? And what you'll do is by reading these books, you'll start to program your brain in a way that you will always see these opportunities. Let's say it is diet. You will always see and understand what type of diet you do want to eat and what type of diet you don't want to eat, because you are consistently taking in the information on what is healthy and what is not. And so therefore programming your brain to know what to go for, what to shoot for when it comes to eating when you're hungry, right? So that's another thing, is programming the brain. It's a very powerful tool to program yourself, right? So if you are, let's say you're stuck in life, right? You don't know what direction to go in. Let's say you're depressed. You don't know what step to take. The best step you can take is read books on where you want to go. So let's say you want to be more successful in business. Pick up a book like The 4-Hour Workweek and start reading that book. Even if you can't act on it right away, you're programming the brain to think in such a way that you will create opportunities as you move forward in life, right? And if you hang on to the book, as soon as you are ready to apply it, reread it, and you will gain more knowledge the second time you read. Every time you read a book, you gain a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more wisdom on the topic, because you have grown since the last time you read it. And so you're able to understand it in a completely different way, in a new way, in a deeper context, in a deeper way, right? And so the next thing is actually that this is a mental workout. So we know we need to exercise the body in order to keep it healthy, in order to keep it functioning. We also need to exercise the mind. Reading is the best way to do this. Reading and journaling are probably the two that I would put, but reading is probably the best one. Reading is a great mental exercise, right? It is forcing your brain to think. It is forcing your brain to absorb information, process information, right? It's forcing you to learn. And so when you're doing this, you're using the functions of the brain, right? And because you're using the functions of the brain, this is going to lead you to more longevity, better memory, right? Better ability to comprehend things as you're listening to them or reading them. It'll give you better vocabulary, right? It'll give you a better ability to articulate, right? Your thoughts into words, because you're exercising the mind. You're working out the mind, the mental space, right? And this is essential if we want longevity. If we don't use our minds, if we don't use our brains, what will happen is they will go stale. They will become stagnant, right? We'll start to experience things like Alzheimer's later in life because we have not used our brain enough earlier in life. Does that make sense? So the next thing is so expanding your vocabulary and then increasing your ability to articulate thoughts into words. So I kind of mentioned that last one, but specifically when you're reading, you will constantly come across new words. You will constantly be expanding your vocabulary. You will constantly be expanding the way that you can articulate your words, because you're seeing different words used in different ways, right? You're seeing different words used in different combinations, right? And so you kind of expand your vocabulary and you expand your ability to articulate thought, because you are constantly taking in the information in such a way that you are you are forced to think about, let's say if it's a word you don't know, you are forced to think about that word. You are forced to learn that new word, right? And when you read different writers, for example, when you read from different authors, you are reading different ways of articulating thoughts. You are reading different ways of speaking, different ways of forming a thought into a word, into a sentence. And so this will just expand your own ability to do the same thing. It will expand your own skills in doing the same thing. And then the next thing is that it's a good dopamine activity, right? So this does release dopamine, but it's a healthy amount of dopamine, right? You are increasing dopamine slowly over time the more you read the book, instead of getting big spikes and then drops and spikes and dips, right? This is a dopamine increase that continues, right? This will increase the baseline of your dopamine, because what you're doing is you're actually gaining more wisdom. You're gaining something from it. You're gaining knowledge, right? Dopamine is released as motivation, as a desire to go and get something. When we go and get that something, we are left with the return of that something. If it is a positive something, if it is something that is healthy for us, right? Let's say it's exercise or it's reading, right? We're going to gain more strength and we're going to gain more knowledge afterwards. And so this will continue to increase our baseline level of dopamine, our baseline level of satisfaction and happiness. And so therefore we become happier over time. As well as the fact that when we do crave dopamine, when we do crave doing something like scrolling on social media, if we pick up a book instead, we're choosing a healthier activity. We're choosing something that won't fry our brain, that will actually benefit us, and we are still satisfying that craving, that desire to do something. We want dopamine because we want to learn something new, or we want to create something new, right? And so if we feed that dopamine with actually learning something, actually creating something, this is when we see this increase in the baseline. But when we destroy ourselves as a result of this desire for dopamine, if we destroy ourselves for the dopamine, we're lowering the baseline, and therefore we crave more dopamine. We need more dopamine, right? So we constantly end up in this constant cycle of just needing more, getting more, and then that leading us to needing even more, right? And so we want to completely get out of this cycle, and we want to replace these habits with things like reading that would be healthy for us, that would be good for us, right? So now I'm going to get into the books that I recommend reading, just for anybody. Pick out whichever one of these books is actually specific to you and what you're trying to learn. But these are just a few random books that I picked out that I really, really liked and that I think pretty much everybody should read. But yeah, so the first one I have here is Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. This book talks about different techniques when it comes to utilizing our inner body, when it comes to our energy centers and cleaning and clearing out the energy centers, right? He talks about the quantum field and how to access it and how to manifest from the quantum field, how to pull certain energies to you from the quantum field, pull certain realities to you. This is a very deep book. It goes very in detail. It teaches about heart coherence, everything. There are a lot of chapters. Each chapter is very in-depth, very in detail, and most of them give a technique at the end that you can use, a type of meditation that you can use in order to utilize what he's teaching. And so that's a really great book. Everybody should pick up that book. Everybody should use at least one of the chapters in that book, one of the techniques in that book. I believe it's the first chapter or the second chapter, but the technique in those chapters, and either the first one or the second one, I can't remember, but the technique in that one is the quantum field meditation and pulling a different reality to you from that meditation. This is a very important one that I think everybody should practice and everyone should gain the skill in. So reading those chapters and then practicing that technique will be huge for anybody who's looking to manifest a different reality, who's trying to look to control and master their own reality and their own mind, right? So Becoming Supernatural is a great book. It has tons of different techniques for tons of different things as well. This isn't the only one, right? The quantum field meditation is not the only one. All of the techniques are very in-depth when it comes to the backstory and the information behind them, and then he goes into detail on the techniques and how to use them. Great book. This one, I have not gotten very far into it yet, but The Way of the Superior Man by David Data. So it's basically just a bunch of rules for men in particular, but really anyone who has a masculine energy and prefers to have a masculine energy to them. And it's basically just a spiritual guide, is this what he writes on the front, but it's a spiritual guide to mastering the challenges of women, work, and sexual desire. And so these are all very important things to learn, right? We need to master how to manage our work. We need to learn how to manage women, right? Because women are a very key piece of our life, a very important part of our life, right? And we need to learn how to understand women. And then sexual desire as well. Sexual desire is the base desire, right? Is the desire that creates everything, that creates life, right? So this is a very important desire and a very important energy to learn to master. And so this book gives techniques specifically for men, specifically with a masculine energy, on how to manage this. One of the chapters, I will open up this book and read from one of the chapters. Let's see if I can find it. So he talks about turning lust into gifts. That's one of the chapter names that I just saw. And let's see. Is this the one I'm looking for? This is not the one I'm looking for. Okay, I can't find the chapter. But the chapter that I was looking for was on a breathing technique in order to fully open up the front of the body, which will actually help with managing lust and managing sexual desire when it comes up. You will be able to circulate the energy through your whole body, instead of it getting stuck and trapped in the lower centers. And so this can be a very important technique for anyone on semen retention. And this is just one of, I believe, over 40 chapters in The Way of the Superior Man, and each chapter gives different techniques, different tips, different methods on each of those three things I mentioned: work, women, and sexual desire, right? And so for any men out there, or I guess women who are more masculine, but mainly men, this is a must-read book. This is definitely a book you need to pick up, and it's a very simple book to read. It's for anyone just getting into reading. It would be a good starter book. I would recommend this for someone just getting into reading. So yeah, check out that book. This one right here, Journeys Out of the Body. I have not read this yet. I have not read this one yet, but this is by Robert A. Monroe. So if any of you have ever heard of the Gateway tapes, Robert Monroe is the one who created them. And his research on these Gateway tapes, it is extensive, but it is very deep. It talks about a lot of really interesting things, and I just want you to go check them out for yourself, or check out this book for yourself. But they are very interesting, to say the least. They're very, very interesting. So I would look into his research. I would look into the Gateway tapes. And then this book talks about journeys out of the body. So it talks about astral projection and out-of-body experience, right? So for anyone who is more spiritual, who is trying to get into astral projection, or who has astral projected and wants more understanding, this is a great book. And Robert Monroe himself is a very interesting person to research on that topic. So if you are interested in the Gateway tapes, I would recommend that book. If you're interested in astral travel, I would recommend that book. Or if you just want a good read, I would recommend that book. So the next one I have is Food Rules. This one I am about halfway through, just about. Food Rules by Michael Pollan. It's basically just a list of rules for eating, for food. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's literally just called Food Rules. But each chapter is just like a little section on on food, how to eat, how you should be eating, right? And just rules based on picking out food from the store, basically, or consuming food, stuff like that. So I'm just going to read one of the chapters, small chapters like this. Like literally, this one's just one paragraph, right? So avoid food products that contain more than 5 ingredients. The specific number you adopt is arbitrary, but the more ingredients in a packaged food, the more highly processed it is. Note 1. A long list of ingredients in a recipe is not the same thing. That's fine. right? So recipes, because we're making the recipe out of whole food ingredients, that's different. So cooking at home is different. But if you were at the store, if you were buying something at the store and you see a list of ingredients that are either things you can't pronounce or things like Red 40, for example, fake looking products, fake looking substances, you don't want to be consuming these. So note 2, some products now boast somewhat deceptively about their short ingredient lists. Haagen-Dazs, I believe that's how you say that, Haagen-Dazs has a new line of ice cream called 5. Great, but it's still ice cream. Same goes for the 3-ingredient Tostitos chips advertised by Frito-Lay. Okay, but they're still corn chips. In such cases, apply Rule 60 for dealing with treats and special occasion foods. So I'm not going to go and read Rule 60 as well, but you get the point. Basically, it's just a bunch of rules for how to eat and how to conduct yourself when it comes to food. Very important for anyone into diet and pretty much anyone in general. I think this is a book you should be reading. I think this is a book you should be studying, because we need to be very, very specific about our diet because of how important our diet is. No matter what you do, no matter who you are, you want to understand and you want to master diet. And this is another one of those books that's a really easy read for anybody just getting into reading. So I would pick that one up if you're looking for a first read, a first book. The next book I have is, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing this one because I know everybody talks about it, but it is a truly, really, really good book. The Power of Now. So anyone who is getting into spirituality, anyone into spirituality, anyone who is religious, this book is amazing, right? It is fucking incredible. This book for me is what made meditation and the application of meditation. It's what made it all click, right? So I never truly was in the present moment until reading this book and until understanding what this book was talking about. And I am about to reread this book, but it basically just teaches you and explains to you how to stay within the present moment, how to observe the present moment, what the present moment actually feels like, right? Because there's a big difference between being present and being in the mind, right? And so we learn through this book, we learn how to actually get into the being, into the present moment, right? We get into a state of being within the present moment, and we rest here and we stay here and we allow our mind to do its job separate from us. We allow ourselves to focus on the present while our mind does its job in processing information, right? And so this book teaches about the pain body, how to manage it, how to deal with it. It teaches about the inner bodies and how to ground your consciousness, ground your awareness into it. Talks about the present moment and how to bring yourself into the present moment, how to stay within the present moment, and then how to get out of and escape the mind, because this is one of our biggest problems right now, is that we are all stuck in our mind. We are very deeply stuck in our mind. So this book, I recommend this book for everybody, but I definitely recommend it for anybody who's spiritual, who wants to get more presence, get more grounded. Spiritual enlightenment happens through the present moment, right? So whether it's God you believe in, or whether it is higher self you believe in, whatever, we only achieve the state of enlightenment and the state of oneness with this being through the present moment. And so this book is a very, very good book when it comes to explaining the present moment and making it make sense for people. Because a lot of times, like, I can tell you I'm in the present moment and not in my mind, separate from thought. But you wouldn't understand what that feels like. You wouldn't know what that is really, truly like unless you've done it, unless you've been there, unless you've been in the present moment. And so what this book does is it explains it in such a good way that you can become present through just reading the book. At least that's what I experienced, right? I believe the book personally just dissolved my ego, brought me into the present moment, just because of how deep the explanations were and how perfect they were, right? So my last book is Atomic Habits. This is the one I mentioned earlier. This is the very first book that I actually read. This is the book that got me into self-improvement. And so if you have looked at all of the other books that I've named and you aren't interested in any of them, and you're just getting into reading and you want to get into reading and you're getting into self-improvement, pick up this book, pick up Atomic Habits, right? It is an easy read. It is a great book. And it teaches you how to change your habits, how to alter your habits, how to remove bad habits and replace them with good habits. And it teaches you the importance of habits as well, how important habits really are, right? How they affect and determine who you become, because habits do directly determine who you are, right? And so it teaches you the importance of habits, and then it teaches you how to control your habits. Excuse me. So this is the last book that I have, but that is a book that I would recommend for pretty much everybody. You can find, I'm not going to link them in this video, but you can find them all on Amazon. Whichever one you decided to pick out, just look it up on Amazon. But yeah, that's all I have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you are just getting into reading and you want more book recommendations, I obviously have a lot of books. I obviously read a lot of books. So if you have any questions, if you want other book recommendations, just like leave a topic down below, leave an explanation of what you'd like to be reading and your kind of level where you're at when it comes to reading, and I'll help you out. I'll find a book for you. But aside from that, if you want any more information on self-improvement, if you want to learn anything more about spirituality, enlightenment, the mind, fitness, subscribe, stay tuned. But aside from that, this video is over and I'm out. Peace.